elements that were extraterrestrial to work within our government and had given them permission. And that had to do with that was supposedly the beginning of the abduction scenario. What about the idea that the government is extremely involved with this, and that they may even be possible for many of the abductions that create negative experiences?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's lots of stories and rumors about, treaties and pacts, etc. And I don't doubt for 1 minute that government agencies around the world, major governments at least, know far more than they're telling us. There's no doubt about that. The big problem I have with that story about Eisenhower is not the idea that Eisenhower, as president, wouldn't have been briefed on the UFO subject and the deeper secrets. I think he would. But it's like, why would aliens that are all-powerful even need to enter into an agreement anyway? Why would they need to get permission to do abductions when they obviously have the technology just to go ahead and do it anyway? It's kind of like, if they're all-powerful, even if we just said no, they could have just said, well, so what? We're going to do it anyway.
Well, that's true.
But I don't doubt, at all that we know there's been official interest in people in the UFO subject. The Contactees, for example, I got countless FBI files that have now been declassified under the Freedom of Information Act, how most of the major contactees of the 50s were being closely watched by the FBI, who were deeply interested in their stories and, would question them, saying, why are you writing this book? What do the aliens want? That sort of thing. So I think in that respect, there's far more known at an official level than meets the eye. But yeah, I mean, abductions, arguably that's one of the bigger reasons why I think there's so much secrecy surrounding the subject, because if people are literally being, taken from their homes, kidnapped and subjected to medical experimentation, and the government really isn't in a meaningful position to stop it. Never mind the fact that aliens exist, but the very fact that they're doing this is enough reason for there to be a huge amount of secrecy surrounding the subject anyway. It's one thing, the fact that aliens might be visiting here itself might not be reasons enough to hide that fact. But if the president stood up tomorrow and said, okay, aliens do exist, we've been hiding the truth for X number of years, but now we've decided to come clean. The problem is, that would then open the floodgates to all these other questions which might be quite unsettling, if we got the answers. And I think the government realizes that, they can't tell part of the story. If they open the floodgates, then literally the floodgates are wide open. And I think, there are certain parts they probably wouldn't mind releasing. But on the other hand, they know that if they do that, then there's no way stopping everything else coming out. So.
Well, I agree with you, and I empathize for the government's position, but I also feel that we as human beings, and possibly extraterrestrial ourselves, have a right to know this stuff. And the fact that they've kept it secret for so long does create a difficulty, but I think that human beings will be more mature and handle this much better than anybody could possibly realize. I think we need to be given a chance. Sorry, go on. Yeah, and also the disclosures could be done in such a way where there is no legal repercussion for those who are disclosing what happened. It's simply, this is what happened. You're going to have to forgive us for having kept this secret. We can't prosecute. Let's move on from here.
No, I think that would be a very good approach. I think one of the reasons also that prevents that taking place is that although I don't doubt that government agencies have massive amounts of more material than we can even begin to comprehend probably, but they might not actually have the answers as to what's going on and why these things are actually coming here. It's kind of like, say, for example, that, if you take Roswell, if the government got its hands on a crashed UFO and a number of alien bodies, well, all that really tells the government is that aliens exist, they've come here and they've crashed. It doesn't actually provide any answers as to why they're coming here and what their agenda is. And maybe the government has a lot of evidence, radar reports, photographs, bodies, craft even, but they might not actually have the answer as to why they're coming here. And I think so part of it could be, part of the secrecy could be, ironically, not the lack of evidence, but the lack of an answer as to what's going on.
Huh. Well, that's an interesting way to look at it.
It's kind of ironic. It's kind of like if somebody time traveled one of today's cars or a truck through time to 200 years ago, and the people would see it. Yeah. They would probably understand what it was. They wouldn't be able to replicate it. And if they had no contact with the people who built it, and they just hid it away, it's like, well, yes, somebody's far more in advance of us, but we know nothing really about what they're doing. So.
We'll just get the corporations to back engineer it.
Yeah, exactly.
I've heard about the guy who was the top military brass up for the defense, of the United States, and he went to one of the corporations. I don't know names, and I wouldn't name them if I had to. And he was met by 3 lawyers, and he said, "Well, I'm here to find out about what you know about the, what have you back engineered and what's going on." And the only answer he got was, "You don't have a need to know."
Yeah.
And this was the top brass, that was in charge of everything. So, there's supposedly 47 levels of clearance above the president. So we can't assume that they know what's going on.
No,
it may be going on, but we don't know who is involved with it.
No, that's right. I mean, my personal view is that, a lot of people think that the government is like one unified body.
Oh,
but
right.
in reality, you have different agencies, and, people like the CIA, the FBI, the National Security Agency, they don't even always share information with each other.
Yeah.
Never mind with the press or the public.
Right.
So, in other words, I think the way the secret has been kept is that, it's not like if you join the CIA, you're suddenly briefed on what happened at Roswell.
Absolutely.
That's nonsense to think that would even happen. I think that what exists somewhere is that there's a very sort of deep cover organization buried very deeply somewhere within the government or the military or a combination or whatever, and they're the ones sitting on the hard evidence.
Yeah.
And then there may not even be like an official organization that exists, like the CIA. It may be, kind of like a group of people who've agreed to keep the secret and who are in control of it.
Yeah.
I think, they're in control of the secret, but they're not an agency which we can pinpoint. It's just
that's right.
The money's being moved through, black budget funding, etc.
Exactly.
Kept away from Congress, and that's how it's all hidden. So.
I'm pretty certain that that's the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing we do know is that the various alphabet soup agencies have done numerous experiments with LSD, blanket spraying of the population. They've done one-on-ones. They've done groups. A lot of mind control experiments. And you document some of that in your book, don't you?
Yeah, I do. There's actually a very weird story about one of the contactees, a man named Orfeo Angelucci, and he was one of the early 1950s contactees who'd had this experience driving home late at night, saw these strange lights in the sky that sort of transformed into, I guess, like very human-looking aliens, a man and a woman, and he claimed a number of interactions and meetings at a remote location with these beings over the course of several years.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote a couple of books on the subject about his encounters. And not long after the first book was published, he was approached by this man who called himself Adam, who said he wanted to meet with Angelucci to discuss his encounters because this guy Adam had supposedly had a very similar experience.
Uh-huh.
And so they chose a particular location, a diner, an out-of-the-way remote diner. And Angelucci went along, sat there in the diner, the guy came in, and basically what happened, a very unusual scenario, this guy Adam said to Angelucci, well, before we start, I want you to take this pill. So he popped the pill in Angelucci's drink, which is like a Coke or something.
Uh-huh.
And he just swilled it down, which is probably isn't the best thing to do if a stranger gives you a pill and just says, take this.
Right.
But he did. But what's interesting is this was roughly 1953, and Angelucci said that he took the pill and they started talking about alien encounters, and within about 20 minutes or so he started to feel strange, like kind of like spaced out, and he said that the diner where they were in, the colours in the room seemed to take on new life, and everything seemed profound and strange and fantastic, and he started seeing all these weird images and colours floating around. It was almost like he'd been put on an LSD trip when you read his story. And he said that sat on the table opposite were two military guys who were staring very intently at them and following the entire conversation. And to me, it sounds like he was sort of put into a drug-induced state to possibly interrogate him about his UFO experiences, and the government wanted to know what was going on. And the way they did it was to sort of lull him into a drug-fueled state where he'd be susceptible, and he would spill his guts, basically, on everything that happened to him.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the interesting thing is, I said this was sort of 1953. This was right around the time when the CIA particularly was doing its MK Ultra experiments, mind control, much of which was centered around the use of LSD, for several reasons. One, to try and see if it would sort of destroy people's memories. They could interrogate them and then they'd forget. And the other one was basically to get information out of them, and the person wouldn't know. And when you read it in the historical context of what the CIA was doing, it sounds very much like that he was, subjected or targeted by one of these agencies that was doing a lot of weird mind control research. And I think there's several indications that a number of UFO cases could be relevant to this whole phenomenon, that people were rendered into sort of altered states and thought they'd even seen UFOs when it may have been some sort of weird government project, to try and determine to what extent the human mind could be altered and manipulated.
It was one of my favorite stories that you wrote about, and one of the things that stood out for me with Orfeo was that he describes in detail the quite a positive, uplifting feeling. I mean, it wasn't anything negative at all. It was just and what about there was ethereal music, and the person sitting across from him said, "Well, look in your glass," or something, and he looks and there's a woman dancing in there, making music in the glass.
Yeah, exactly, like a little woman. I mean, like I said in the book, this sounds like a classic hallucination, a real sort of mind-bending trip he was on.
It was a good one, whatever it was.
It was a good one, whatever it was.
I wouldn't mind getting hold of some of that stuff.
No, I think he actually enjoyed it. It was positive for him. He had a good time. But, I think that's one of the important things, to remember is that, retrospectively, it was like a classic LSD hallucinatory drug type scenario. There's no doubt in my mind that that's what he was rendered into. The big question is why, but when you have these military people sitting in the room watching him as well, you've got to begin to wonder.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But that shouldn't take, I would stress, that shouldn't take away from the fact that there are genuine UFOs as well, but I think the government is also manipulating the subject for its own ends. So there's like, the government staging stuff and faking things to confuse the fact that aliens really are coming here.
Yeah. Well, I've also had guests on the show, Andrew D. Bajago, who said that there's a base on Mars and a base on Moon, and that this group that you talked about that's very deep, that doesn't exist, has back engineered some of the ships that go that can travel to those places using anti-grav and various other things. So, but we wouldn't have any way of knowing that, obviously, because it's such a deep cover, and the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. So, I mean, we can only hope that someday the time will pass and we'll be allowed to play in the sandbox with these other people. But for now, it seems like they're pulling all the strings. But not all of the strings. You mentioned crop circles and orbs. And that's something I don't understand. I've had several guests on about that, and one of my close friends has taken some incredible orb pictures. I mean, they're just off the charts. And I mean, I'm just amazed to see these things, and she says that she feels a presence and an energy, and they become her friends.